Labour law experts and delegates from around the country have gathered in Johannesburg for this year's annual Labour Law Conference. Decent work and formalisation of the informal economy are some of the issues topping the agenda. More than 3 million of the country's employed population are in informal jobs. Well, let's discuss this further now. I'm joined by Labour Law Conference Chairperson Nikki Wichanel to tell us more. Nikki, good evening, and thanks for your time amid this very busy conference for you, I'm sure. Now, you're looking at your theme this year is partnering for decent work, and obviously very relevant, but what do we mean by decent work in this context where we are now?
First, if I can mention that the reason that we entitled the conference Partnering for Decent Work is to celebrate the ILO's centenary. And the focus of the ILO for a very long time has been on promoting the decent work agenda. So decent work entails a number of different aspects, including employment and access to employment, which is obviously of enormous significance in South Africa given our unemployment rates, especially amongst the youth. It also involves providing social security for vulnerable members of our society and workers. So, for example, the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act, the UIF fund and that sort of thing. And there's attention being paid to extending those rights to the informal sector as well. It also involves social dialogue, encouraging workers to have a voice and to have a say. And, of course, workers also have a constitutional right to engage in collective bargaining and exercise the right to strike. In South Africa, we do have NEDLAC, which is the National Economic, Labour and Development Council, which is a forum specifically set up to encourage this tripartite social dialogue. So we're doing well there. And then, of course, it also entails ensuring fundamental labour rights. And I think the key is in the word decent work. We're not expecting fantastic work necessarily or superlative conditions. We're expecting simply decent work, which entails things like a safe and healthy working environment, non-discriminatory conduct, basic conditions such as those set out in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act and other pieces of legislation.
Well, we're in a state now where I suppose some people are lucky to even just find a job, whether those conditions are great or not. And I suppose, you know, that is challenge number one. But we are a signatory to the ILO, as you say. And you've got topics like, you know, what do we have to celebrate 25 years into democracy, gender dynamics in the workplace, and then the world in turmoil, and also formalizing the informal. How do we compare? Because it seems like we are not alone in our struggles.
No, we're definitely not alone. And regulation or recommendation 204, which is the recommendation published by the ILO relating to formalising the informal, is a global project. The countries who are actually doing best at the moment are Malawi, Mozambique, and there's one other African country who's doing well. Zimbabwe is probably the worst example because they've used the recommendation to formalise informal traders simply to tax them, which is definitely not what's intended.
And that's what I was going to ask you about, formalising the informal economy. And, you know, the informal sector, as we've been hearing, is booming. It's doing
enormous.
well. It's enormous. And will formalising actually, you know, kill it for them, kill it for the sector? What will be the benefit for anybody in that?
It's an ongoing discussion. And another concern is that with the fourth industrial revolution and with the increasing impact of technology on the world of work, it's predicted that there are going to be more and more people leaving secure employment or battling to find secure old-fashioned employment, if I can call it that, and they're going to be rather absorbed in the informal economy. So it's a growing problem, and you're absolutely right to identify that there's a conflict between providing jobs at all, as you say, not for the moment worrying about decent standards, but just providing any jobs at this stage.
I would imagine that it might be more helpful to encourage more people to go into the informal sector and provide support for the informal sector rather than drawing them into something that doesn't quite seem to be working at the moment.
Certainly at the moment, the Department of Labour is engaged in negotiations, I suppose you would call it, negotiations around formalising the informal, and they are drawing on the expertise and consulting with various interest groups, including the informal traders themselves. And even the informal traders can be divided into two categories. They're individuals, self-employed, you know, your typical street vendor or waste picker, for example. But then you also have units, economic units, organised in the informal economy, like cooperatives and so on. And there's likely to be even conflict between those two groups within the informal sector as to exactly how they would like to be formalised, and whether in fact they do want to be formalised.
So you spoke of a couple of African countries that are getting it right. What are they doing? It was Malawi and two others.
Malawi, primarily they're doing what South Africa is also doing. So I suppose we can count South Africa among the countries who are doing well, albeit after a slow start. They are engaging with the informal sector, and I think that is the most important thing. It's very easy to prescribe what we think the informal sector needs and what we think they'd like, but we actually need to hear from them. And those countries who've been highlighted as really engaging well with recommendation 204 from the ILO are those countries who are talking to the people, which South Africa is doing. Initially, the Department of Labour excluded the informal traders, but that was remedied some years ago, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And the informal sector is very organised and strongly represented worldwide.
I suspect the key might lie there to solving some of our problems. Okay, well, let's wait and see. You've got one more day. Let's see what else happens at your conference. Thank you very much, Nikki, for that insight.